VA, thank you so much for your presentation. Yeah, as Clara mentioned, I managed to get COVID on the way home from Marseille, a little parting gift, a thank you gift from France, and I'm still recovering from it. So I won't have my usual 100% energy, but I'll do my best. I'm very invested in the topic I'm going to be speaking about today. But first, I want to just say a bit about what Olivier presented on, what I understood of it, and of course you could see what an amazing spectacle and immersive experience he and his colleagues provide for students. And I think that is one of the cardinal features that our discipline, classics, and especially Greek theater. We're fortunate as classicists to have Greek theater as part of our repertoire because it does provide that whole person experience for students. And I know that at my university, theater and Greek tragedy and Greek comedy is a draw that brings students in who might not otherwise be interested in classics for the history of it or the philosophy of it or the linguistics of it. They kind of get hooked by that immersive quality of what it means to be involved in a production, a theater production. And we do that at my university. We have, actually, I have to say, nothing compared to what Olivier, you and your colleagues are doing there, which is very, very impressive. But we do the same sort of thing, an annual Greek play where it's very student-driven, student-run, and again, that immersive experience is just so invaluable and something that we as classicists can really offer both students who major or concentrate in classics, but also those who come to classics who have a disciplinary major in some other area, even as far-fetched as computer science and biology. Theater and arts bring people together in a very unique way. So I'll say a little bit about that, about my course. But I guess the final thing I want to say about Olivier's presentation is that when Richard Wagner thought he was reinventing Greek tragedy when he was putting on operas at Bayreuth, he described what he was doing as, in German, a Gesamtkunstwerk, so a total work of art. That is true. I mean, Greek tragedy was a song and dance number that involved all aspects of endeavor: music, spectacle, poetry, dance. It has a political dimension, and of course, therefore, a social dimension. So it has a mythological dimension. So it has everything really. And what I really was impressed with Olivier's students is that not only that, it's very practical. Students are building sets. They're putting together, they're making the costumes. In ancient Greece, this probably would have been done by slaves or by, menial workers. But to have, students involved in every aspect of that kind of production, I think is really the salvation of our discipline, because it speaks to how frankly, useful classics is for life pursuits. And so, yeah, we're lucky to have theater as part of our repertoire as teachers and as scholars. So I want to talk to you today about, before I share my screen, I want to just give a little preamble about what I'm going to talk about. And that is, as Clara mentioned, a course that I teach. And I only newly teach this. It's a new course for me that I invented, I think, 2 years ago. So I've been in Marseille all this past year. Before that, I taught it just before I went on research leave. So I taught it for the first time 2 years ago during the pandemic. And I invented it as a way to have a high enrolling course for non-classics majors that would kind of be what we might say in English, a gateway course. We speak of gateway drugs. This would be like a gateway course into the field of classics to get students interested and perhaps take more of our courses in classics, even, God forbid, Greek and Latin language courses. And the idea was to have it be a course that would enroll about 100 students. My goal was to have it be a course that would be relatively easy to teach because managing a class of 100 students can be time consuming and taxing. And you cannot give each and every student in the class, if you have 100 students, the same kind of attention that you would if it were a smaller seminar kind of course. So, there were trade-offs involved, but I think ultimately we were after the big gains that such a course could offer for our program in classics and for the discipline of classics in the 21st century. I don't know what it's like in France, but in America, the United States, at this time, classics is experiencing an exceptionally rough time. Everything from kind of far right political appropriation of the classics in Trumpian America. And I don't mean proper appropriation, improper appropriation, but this idea of quote unquote Western civilization, which in that kind of discourse means white civilization, which usually also means Christian civilization, has been very problematic because students who are 17, 18, 19, 20 years old don't have the depth of knowledge to understand that movement, at least in the United States, the far right appropriation of classics is a misappropriation, and that in fact, if you are a classicist, like as I am, and as most of you probably are, you know, and I know that within the tradition of classics, i.e. the quote unquote Western tradition, is built into it a critique of that tradition, so that all the great authors that we read from antiquity are critics of their contemporary societies. So they're not just value affirmers, they are questioners. And that's one thing that I think is also a saving grace of classics once it's communicated effectively. That is, classics can be a great critique of our own tradition and of our current situation, our current malaise in the 21st century as destroyers of the planet, or overconsumers, or whatever we are, people who income inequality, a culture of a society of income inequality, or racial discrimination that's unfortunately still with us. So classics offers critique for all of that, and I think part of our job is to, as classicists, as teachers, to try to communicate that and show it by example, by showing how the texts actually problematize many of these 20th century issues, 21st century issues. All right, so the course I teach is called The Ancient World and Film. And before I put the PowerPoint up, let me just say that it is not what you might expect from a course entitled The Ancient World and Film, meaning it's not a course about showing films that are somehow reworked versions of ancient episodes from myth or from history. So in other words, it's not, I don't show films like Spartacus or Ben-Hur or even Gladiator, as much as I like Gladiator. Gladiator is a great film. That's not the purpose in this course that I teach. Rather, what I'm trying to do is juxtapose modern films that have some sort of structural, thematic, or connection to an ancient original text to which I juxtapose it. So basically the game in this course is that I take a seminal text from the classical canon, and then I pair it with two films that I think somehow are in dialogue with that text, not direct dialogue, meaning the filmmaker does not necessarily have to have, it does not have to be cognizant of the ancient text in making his or her film. Rather, the film stands in some sort of structural or thematic parallelism with that ancient work, which I find is a much more productive way to teach students about, well, first of all, teach them how to think, but also teach them how to discern similarities and differences, to be able to see those in comparing seemingly unlike things. One thing that I find one of the most heuristic exercises we can engage in as scholars and as teachers with students is to show how seemingly unconnected things are in fact connected, but also to recognize differences, even subtle differences, and to recognize what they mean, what they can signify, those differences in terms of interpretation. So it's a course that is, sophisticated at that level, but belying that sophistication of the goal of what I'm trying to achieve with the students, the course is very simple, very basic. I take a classical text and I pair it with 2 films, and the students write a weekly short essay on that on the relationship of the films to the text. One more word about films that I'll say before I tell you what the course, the actual nuts and bolts of the course are. I view films as sort of I view them as texts. Films are not just entertainment. They're not just a reprieve from, serious thinking or heavy reading. They can be that too, but I view films as texts in their own right. And I try to encourage students to, quote unquote, read them as carefully as you would a text. Of course, they're multisensory, so they involve visual and sound inputs in a way that a text doesn't immediately. You have to kind of generate that in your head when you read a text. But films have that, so it becomes more interesting because you have multi-stimuli that are informing your impressions, but ultimately the same skills that it takes to interpret a text are the skills that you bring to interpreting a film. And one of the things I find that students learn is that they become better textual readers because they are already pretty good film critics, because that is a medium of our time. People watch films all the time. They don't read books all the time, right? So there's a sort of a natural inclination to be able to be a film critic amongst our generation of students, I find, that actually enables them to read text more carefully. And when they see the connection, when they see that one set of skills is transferable to this other area, i.e. ancient literature, they find it kind of liberating. They find it freeing that you can read an ancient text as if you were watching a film. It's kind of a strange way to put it. It's kind of like coming in through the back door with students to get them interested in ancient texts, even though I take the ancient text as a point of departure theoretically. Okay, let's see if I can, before I share my screen, I want to share a couple of documents. I want to see if I can do this. Clara, let's see. I think I can do this. So I go to the chat box and I want to share a couple of files. And now I have to find where it is. Be patient with me. I'm not a very good multitasker. And I'm also running on 60% here. Okay, I'm going to, did that come up? Okay, good. Let me try one more. How did I just do that? What did I just share? The schedule. Okay, now I'm going to share getting started. But hold on, I got to go to file. I'm getting there. Okay, so I'm sharing these documents with you in good faith. These are essentially, it's my syllabus. So you can steal any ideas that you think are worthwhile in your own teaching. You can use any of the ideas that I share with you today to enhance your own courses, or if you teach a film course, classics and film course, you can use these ideas or not as you see fit. But there they are, and I thought it would be helpful for you to have them maybe in writing so you can look at them later in case I'm speaking too quickly or my American accent is throwing you off and all of that. All right, now I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Oh, no, that's not how I do it. I do it this way, share screen, okay? I know it works because I already tried it. And now I go to play from start. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, so I open the course. The first text that I teach is the Odyssey. So the Odyssey is a long text, and we're only spending essentially I think 3 weeks on the Odyssey total. So if students hadn't read it before, I ask that they read it in English. I use Robert Fagel's translation, which I like a lot. But I also kind of assume that many students, at least in American students, are familiar with the story of the Odyssey and have read it in high school. So that's the first text that I deal with. And with the Odyssey, I pair these films. Now, a word about the Odyssey. The Odyssey, of course, is a homecoming story, all right, about coming home from being away for a long time. It's a story about a father and a son and a husband and a wife. And so it involves all that kind of social dynamic of almost like a Star Wars kind of, who's my father from Telemachus's point of view. So it's got that ingredient too. But the thing I like about the Odyssey the most, what attracts me to the Odyssey as a text the most, is that it represents this self-reflexivity of poet and hero, or character and poet mingled into one, because the bulk of the Odyssey is told in the first person by Odysseus in a flashback right in the middle of the poem about his most famous experiences with the Cyclops, with the sirens. And the Odyssey represents, in some ways, an instantiation of a song culture, the song culture that was Homeric poetry, oral Homeric poetry, but also the song culture that was the performance culture of 6th and 5th century Athens and other Greeks, polis. So the reason why I pair O Brother, Where Art Thou with the Odyssey is, well, obviously it is loosely based on the Odyssey. One of the delightful things about the film is that it's not a one-to-one correspondence with the text. Clara has written beautifully on this topic, and she brings this out in her essay about this film. There are a lot of close calls. There are a lot of near misses between the film and the poem, which makes it very interesting for somebody who knows the poem, because O Brother stands in relationship to the poem as a very original reworking, rethinking of Odyssean themes without being a reworking of the Odyssey itself. One of the things that the O Brother film captures best, I think, is the song culture of the Odyssey, the song culture, song and poetry culture. Of course, in the film, it's 1930s Depression Southern music, right? Which is T-Bone Burnett was the person responsible for the soundtrack, a music archivist, but also a performer in his own right. A wonderfully curated set of classics from the Old South that serves as the soundtrack to the narrative. So that's one reason why I chose this film to go with the Odyssey. I'll try to err on the side of caution here and go through this quickly so there's time for comments and questions. Now, O Brother, Where Art Thou, even though it's based on the Odyssey, is actually more directly based on this film, Sullivan's Travels from 1941. This is a film that is about a hobo, about a filmmaker who wants to discover what it's like to be an average common man, and becomes a hobo and rides the rails and has these Odysseus-like experiences as a wanderer, as a hobo. I don't know what the French equivalent of hobo is, a street person, and sees the underbelly of America from that vantage point. So the Coen brothers are actually basing their movie, their film, on this one even more directly than they are on the Odyssey. So I show the students this film as well, to kind of triangulate the Coen brothers' work with the Odyssey and the film that is its source. Beautiful performance by Veronica Lake. I think this is her first appearance in a film. She's wonderful. The other film that last time I taught this course, I paired the Odyssey with, was Tim Burton's Big Fish. Don't know if you know this film or not, but it's about a father figure who's basically a big liar. He's a big storyteller. He makes up fantastical stories about his past experiences, and it's told from the vantage point of his son. His son is now an adult, and his father is dying in the film, and it's all about the son coming to terms with, the father, who's like this larger than life storyteller. The son is quite aware, or at least he thinks he's quite aware, that most of the things he thinks he knows about his father are not true, because they're all stories that he told about his past. So this film is very much about the art and act of storytelling. And it's full of magical realism, as you can imagine from a Tim Burton film. There's a giant in it. There's actually a couple of Odyssey-like, allusions in the film itself. So it makes a nice pairing, but it with the Odyssey, but it brings out the father-son relationship to a greater degree than "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" does, which is more involving the homecoming, the song culture, and the husband and wife reconciliation at the end. So Big Fish, I forgot the date on that, but now one thing I'm thinking about doing is switching out maybe Sullivan's Travels. I probably will switch out Sullivan's Travels and include this film. Don't know if you've ever heard of this film, English language film, I think from 1998. And it's basically set in medieval England, and it's about a young boy and his relationship to a father figure who has this sort of prophetic gift or something, and he receives visions in the night, and he discovers this passageway that takes them somewhere, and the prophecy is that they must go to where the child says, and ultimately what they do is they go through this tunnel and they wind up in 20th century New Zealand, in modern New Zealand, and they're medieval, peasants. So it's literally about an odyssey of a time travel from one place to another, but it really captures well that father-son dynamic and about what is real in the world and what is not, in a way that the Odyssey also does, because the Odyssey is full of fantastical adventures, but yet it's set in, a recognizable Homeric, heroic age of Greece. So this is a film that works well with that, and I'm thinking about trying that out, this year. The next text that I treat is the Oresteia, all three plays of the Oresteia. And this, of course, is it's the only trilogy we actually possess entire from Greek antiquity. It's a masterwork, I think, of social, political relevance, mythological relevance, but also dramatic innovation. Terrific text. Students love it. All about interfamilial strife. Nobody in the trilogy is innocent. No one is completely guilty. Everyone has an argument. Everyone has a side. It really plays out that problem very well, and students love it for that. It has a resolution, a dea ex machina at the end that is very interesting, and students talk a lot about the ending of this play. But anyway, it's a true classic that makes for great conversations. So I pair that text with these two films. First, Pier Paolo Pasolini's Notes for an African Oresteia. You may not know this film. I've written a pretty lengthy essay about it in the journal Orion, and it's the film is not a feature film. I mean, Pasolini did make feature films based on classical tragedy. He did the Oedipus Rex. He did Medea, starring Maria Callas, who regrettably never sings in the film. I can't believe that, but so be it. So Pasolini had a penchant for Greek antiquity, no doubt, but this film is different. This film basically asks the question, if I were to set Aeschylus's Oresteia in late 1960s Africa, so immediately post-colonial Africa, in Eastern Africa, where many countries had recently gained independence from the British or the Belgians or whomever, he says, if I were to set Aeschylus's trilogy there, why might I do it? How might I do it? And so it's essentially kind of like a documentary. He takes film footage about with average people in Africa, and he voices over and discusses his reasons and his thinking why. It's got a terrific score by the jazz saxophonist Gato Barbieri, who a year after this film was made won a Grammy for Last Tango in Paris with Marlon Brando. It's a film like you've never seen before, and if you've never seen it, I recommend you try to see it. It's both disturbing, not because it's like necessarily violent or gory. It's not like his film Salo, which is like unwatchable. It's bothersome in a different way because of the tensions with colonialism and racial issues that it does bring up. But it's also very powerful. And if you were interested, I could send you the reference to the essay I've written about it, which would contextualize it for you. Pasolini was a communist, and he takes a very communist view, a reading of Aeschylus's Oresteia, which he is dependent on a Greek scholar named George Thompson, which makes it very, very rich and illuminating. The other text that I pair Aeschylus with, and I don't pair this film directly with the Oresteia, but I have students read Euripides' Electra. Now, the Oresteia, along with Sophocles' Electra and Euripides' Electra, provide an interesting case study in antiquity for how different playwrights treated similar thematic material. It works so well in teaching these courses to have students read each of them so they can see individual playwrights' own stamp and own approach to sort of common material that was mythological, known to all, how they adapt it, how they change it, and how they use it to convey their own agendas. So Euripides is the third of the three. It goes Aeschylus, then Sophocles, then Euripides. Euripides' Electra is very influenced by the Sophists, and he directly questions Aeschylus's version. In fact, he parodies Aeschylus's version of especially the recognition scene in the second play of the Oresteia. So The Forgotten Pistolero, this film here, is a spaghetti western by Fernandino Baldi, well-known spaghetti western director from Italy, who that is based on Euripides' version, Euripides' Electra. And this is very interesting for students because they can see a genre that has absolutely nothing to do with Greek tragedy, but about as far away from Greek tragedy as you can possibly be, but yet its plot is informed by it. So it makes for a very kind of structural reading for students, and they love it. The movie's corny. It's got all the spaghetti Western, touches, and it works really well in this context. So the next text that we read together in this class is Plato's Symposium. And I'm just going to take for granted that you generally know what the symposium is about. Socrates and company talking about love. What is love? What's it for? In the context of, a dinner party, essentially, a drinking party at that. And it's all about dialogue and speech making. So it's all about people giving speeches in praise of love, for what they think love is and what proper love is, and also dialogue, discussing later on, especially when Alcibiades shows up in the symposium, it devolves into a conversation between Alcibiades and Socrates. Of course, Plato favored dialogue over speech making, and that's the reason why that is the case there. So with the symposium, which students usually have never read before and find incredibly interesting for the fact that it deals with homoerotic relationships, which is usually eye-opening to them. They didn't necessarily realize that this was such an open thing, a topic of conversation, a whole dinner party themed on this topic in antiquity. So that itself is eye-opening for them. So I pair this film with two other, that text with two films. First of all, Richard Linklater's Waking Life. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Richard Linklater's films. He did Before Sunrise, Before Sunset with Julie Delpy. That's the COVID talking, sorry. 1 second. But he also most recently did the film Boyhood, which took him like 12, 15 years to film, using his own son as a character. Amazing film. I think he won an Oscar for that. But this is a film he did in, I think it's 2000. And it's an animated film. The film was shot using digital video, and then it was rotoscoped afterwards, which means it was animated. So he took the video footage of characters in dialogue. I'll say a little bit about that in a minute, and then rotoscoped it. So the film consists entirely of dialogue and monologue. And the premise of the film is that a character is not, you're not, as a watcher of the film, as the viewer, you're not sure if the character is dead or just sleeping. There are hints of both at the very beginning. He's kind of hit by a car, but you're not sure if he's hit by a car in his dream or if he's really hit by a car, and the rest of it. So the whole premise of the film is, are we awake or are we asleep? And in the course of walking through this semi-lucid dream, the main character, Wiley Wiggins, meets up with all sorts of people who engage him in conversation, or he overhears other conversations taking place on every conceivable topic. And actually, Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy make a cameo appearance in this film as lovers in bed and talking about reincarnation. It's very, very clever, very, very effective. But the reason why I show this film along with the symposium is because I think it gets at exactly what Plato is up to in the symposium. And that is trying to capture what an animated conversation is, meaning literally in Linklater's film, the conversation is literally animated, right? In Plato, he didn't have rotoscoping, he didn't have the moving picture, but he does engage in excellent character study, and he uses words and rhetoric to portray the foibles and shortcomings of his interlocutors in the symposium in a way like nobody else does in a text like I've never seen it done before. The symposium is perfect for that. So the students won't get that unless they know Greek, of course. They can gather personalities and characterization from the English, but they do see it in Waking Life. So it's a wonderful text to pair, and a wonderful film to pair with that text. The other film that I show with this is Call Me by Your Name by Luca Guadagnino. And this, of course, has homoerotic relationship as its centerpiece, and it's problematized in the film, and it's also problematized in Plato's text. So this is a very interesting film to show along with it. There's an oblique reference in the film to Plato's Symposium, to Greek love, and the whole the idea of male relationships comes up in the film. I was surprised that many students were a little bit bothered by the film, especially because of the age disparity between the two characters. So Olivier and I can't remember what the older Arm and Hammer the character's name is, but it doesn't matter. They were bothered by that, and I was surprised at that. But of course, in the Symposium, that's a big theme about the age parity or non-parity of male lovers becomes an issue in the Symposium. So again, it works very well. It's about a modern male and male relationship, and students have a lot to say about it, and very powerful, very moving. The next text I use is Suetonius's Life of Nero, an endless source of entertainment and scurrilous detail. Students are blown away by this text just by the sheer outrageousness of the details that Suetonius recounts about Nero. And it opens up a whole world of ancient Rome to them. So this is essentially the first time students encounter ancient Rome in this course. It's been all Greeks beforehand. Now it's into Rome, the High Empire, and I pair it with two films. This one first, The Wolf of Wall Street, about Jordan Belfort and his rise and fall as a Wall Street tycoon, but not so much a tycoon, but like a fraudster. And the reason why I pair it with this film is because, if anything, Nero wanted to be a performer. He didn't want to be emperor. He wanted to be a chariot racer, and he wanted to be a singer, an opera singer, the equivalent of, in antiquity, a kitharist. And Scorsese in this film portrays the main character, Jordan Belfort, as a performer, if anybody ever was one that could, he manages call centers, and he talks people into investing money, scamming them into doing it by virtue of his talent as an artist of the verbal sort, who can talk people around things, talk people into things. There's a couple of scenes in this film, if you've seen it, near the end, where he drums up his whole call staff into a frenzy, where Scorsese basically has Leonardo DiCaprio play a Pentecostal preacher. And in America, that's perhaps more of a reality than it is for you in France. Somebody who drums up the congregation into a frenzy and gets their adulation and gets them enthusiastic about the message that he's purveying. So that's one of the, but also, of course, the other reason why I pair it with this film is because, the idea of rising to the top, but then the ultimate downfall. So it's definitely a story about hubris and overreach and excess, and the wages of sin is death. The other film that I pair Life of Nero with is Citizen Kane. And this gives the students a chance to experience a classic film. I think Citizen Kane is at the top of the list of most lists as the best film ever made, or most influential film ever made. And it tells a similar story. And for us living here in America, where the 4 years prior with Trump as president, and who knows what's going to happen with the coming presidential election, God forbid he'd be elected again, it tells a very a story that for students is very contemporary, very real about a huckster, a fraudster rising to power, but then ultimately the fall and demise, but also how he gains control and how that fraudster influences other people and wins popularity. Great film, classic film, and students react to it very well. It is also part of their education, their film education. The next the next text I read is Aristotle's Poetics. And this is interesting because by the time we get here in the course, students will have already done a lot of kind of analysis of screenplay, analysis of text, right? When they read Aristotle, they finally get a chance to see somebody who has formally analyzed text and gives some sort of rules about how a good story works or what makes for a good story. Now, Aristotle is talking about plot in the Poetics. And as if you've read it recently, or even if you haven't, if you know, he downplays spectacle considerably. For Aristotle, plot is all. Plot is muthos, and imitation is a large part of poetic art, meaning tragic art as well. So students read the Poetics. I kind of have my own take on the Poetics and give them that view, which is not your standard English 101 view of the Poetics, and students appreciate that. But what I do, I read the Poetics with them so that they understand the centrality of plot. And translated to the screen, that means screenplay. A film is only as good as its screenplay is. And the screenplay, of course, contains the plot. Even if it's not the dialogue, it's the architecture that makes the plot work. And if you have a poor plot, no matter how good the acting is, no matter how good the special effects are or the costumes are, the film is not going to succeed ultimately, my view. And students tend to agree with that. So one of the films that I pair with the Poetics is Memento. And the reason why I do this is because Memento is a story told backwards. The plot does not proceed chronologically. In other words, the plot is not coterminous with the play. Aristotle says this in the Poetics verbatim. He says the plot and the play are not coterminous, meaning they're not the same thing. They don't unfold the same way. So think of perhaps Oedipus, think of Sophocles' most famous favorite play, Oedipus. How much of the plot of Oedipus does not happen in the play? Quite a bit of it. He does not kill his father in the play. He's not exposed in the play. The shepherd doesn't find him in the play. It doesn't happen as part of the action. These are all told either by the chorus or they're details that are revealed in dialogue as the play unfolds, but they happen outside of the action of the play. So Aristotle was aware of this central feature of plot and how it works. And Memento shows this so well because it basically proceeds from the end to the beginning, and you don't know what happens at the beginning until you get at the end. I won't parse the whole story, but it's about a guy's wife who was murdered, and he's trying to find out how she was murdered, but he suffers memory loss, short-term memory loss. So he can only remember so much before he loses it. And so, as you see from the little picture on the front of the DVD, he tattoos clues to find out the answer onto his body, so that he can be reminded of where he is in his own plot in discovering who done it, who's responsible for his wife's murder. I'm almost done. Whoop! I don't want to do that. I want to make it big again. Okay. Another film I show with this text is Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a lighthearted romantic comedy. It's a great film to show after showing Memento and all the other kind of more serious films before it. It's lighthearted, but it also involves a similar premise, how changing one plot detail can change the outcome of a whole story. So it shows how plot is really central to how a story unfolds and also to how a character develops within the plot. So again, this is all part of what Aristotle talks about in the Poetics, and students get a chance to see it expressed, seeing it in a very easy to assimilate way in this lovely film, charming, witty, romantic comedy. Last text that I read with my students is Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy, not a classical text, but one deeply rooted in the classics. Birth of Tragedy, as you may or may not know, Nietzsche engages with this dynamic. He kind of reads all of Greek culture as sort of a bipolar expression of two forces in culture, especially as they find expression in art, and that is the Apolline, that art and thought associated with Apollo, and the Dionysiac, art and thought associated with Dionysus. And he argues that tragedy is the perfect amalgamation of both, so that the music and the dance that tragedy entails is part of the Dionysiac realm, and the dialogue and the plot of tragedy is the Apollon. Often thinks that Nietzsche sides with Dionysus over Apollo in the Birth of Tragedy, but ultimately he argues that tragedy needs both to function, and we, by extension, in culture, contemporary culture even, need both to survive. Nietzsche views art as the great redemptress of the inanity, the misery, the suffering of life. And he argues that the Greeks understood this uniquely in the history of Western civilization, and that we need to recover it for him, the 19th century. So with this text, oh, I'm sorry, I did it again. With this text, I pair the following. This film by Guy Maddin, he's a Canadian director, called The Saddest Music in the World, which is an absurdist film about a music contest where during the Depression in North America, where people are competing from all over the world to win money and at this festival of song. So the idea of music is central to this, and the idea is whoever writes the saddest music in the world wins the prize. And hard to explain. It's like a film you've never seen. It's done in black and white, and it's also been tinkered with to make it look like it's a film archive, meaning it's been damaged. So it has this quality that makes it look like it's from the early era of film, but that's all intentional. I can talk more about that in a minute. Oh, I did it again. Didn't mean to do that. Okay, final film, and then I'll stop, almost right on time, is Werner Herzog's film, Fitzcarraldo. Fitzcarraldo is about a crazy man whose aspiration is to build an opera house in the Amazon jungle. And it has that strong impetus of music behind driving the plot, that music is somehow, in music is somehow a redemption. It's about titanic struggle to bring culture to the far reaches of the jungle. So to bring civilization to put it this way, to bring the Apolline to the Dionysiac. And Herzog really captures the struggles involved in that, and the, I'm going to say, will to power that the main character, Klaus Kinski, brings to that character, the power that he brings, the will to power to see it, to realize it, to bring it to fruition. This is a film that I'm debating whether or not I'm going to continue using. Students found it harder to assimilate than other films, but I can find something, I'm sure, to substitute for it that would work with Nietzsche. If you have any suggestions, I'm open to them. So I'll stop there, and happy to take any questions and or comments, and I'll stop sharing my screen. Great.